questioning techniques. Right, in the classroom, there are really two main motives why a teacher is going to ask questions to the class. The first is what we call, especially in ESOL, elicitation, to elicit answers and to get the class involved in an interactive cognitive exercise to arrive at a subject or new information that's going to be delivered in that session. This is as opposed to just lecturing the class and saying, for example, present continuous verb tense is a verb with ing on the end of it. Instead of just telling the class this and showing them a PowerPoint, you might get the class to consider verbs, ask them questions, and arrive at that through interaction. The second main motive for questioning is assessment. And there are different reasons why you want to assess your students. You may want to assess their prior knowledge before delivering a new area. You may want to assess their previous learning. It might be a recap on a previous session. You may even want to assess if the student at the back of the class that's been chatting has listened to what you've said. When it comes to elicitation, the first motive, open questions or global questions are fine. Asking the class, what do we put on the end of a verb, for example, when we're talking about an action that's continuing? I am talking, she's reading, we're walking. That's kind of okay to ask as an open or global question. What I find tends to happen in my sessions and sessions I observe is the strongest students, the most able students will dominate or put their hands up all the time. They'll dominate that type of opening questions, open questions. So it's almost like casting a net as a fisherman and then pulling in whatever fish randomly happen to swim into the net. So for assessment, we obviously need a more precise, a more refined form of questioning. There are a few quick tips that can do this. For a start, you can still ask a question that's quite global for everybody to think about, but you can say, hands up those who can tell me. And this involves a little bit of training with the class. Obviously, at the start of the year, people are going to shout out. You'll still get the odd student that's very enthusiastic that will shout out and say, oh, it's this. But after a while, you should start to notice the class will raise their hands, and then you can pick the students that you want to assess. The students that don't put their hands up, sometimes they're more important to notice those than it is to note those that do. Another idea is to say, tell your partner or tell your neighbour. So you ask a question such as, do we put ing on the end of verbs or do we put ed when talking about the present continuous? Tell your partner. I saw this in the Tekla conference, really effective. And you could even start just doing that, point out, tell your partner. Students will start to talk to each other. You can then watch and assess 2, 3, 4, maybe even 6 different students giving their answers, rather than just listening to one answer from a question that's posed to the whole class. There's obviously a lot more in questioning techniques. There's the pause, pose, pounce method. There's bouncing questions from more able to less able students. And there's also follow-ups using Bloom's taxonomy. Differentiation in questioning. When you've got a student that's more able, you might want to ask them more of an analysis question rather than a knowledge question. Obviously, it's impossible to plan out and write every question you're going to ask that session, but it's well worth spending a minute just before the session starts, even just mentally, to think about what challenges, what questions are going to be asked today and who are they going to be aimed at. Obviously, questioning techniques is a very big area. So the main 2 tips that I'd recommend is hands up who can tell me, and tell your partner. And that way you can ask a lot more open questions or global questions that actually can be assessed, or you get some kind of control about where the answers are coming from, rather than the 2 most able students in the class dominating this part of a session. Okay.